So does it feel like he's not following the command to be fruitful and multiply? Because, some people are like, you got to have all these kids. I'm going to have as many kids as God allows me to have and all this other stuff. Like, with him only having the 3 sons, what would you say to like people who are like, well,
That
you
makes
should
sense
have.
to me because he was like 600 or so. And that means his wife was probably 600 or so. I don't know. I think that time might have been over. And his children were grown, those boys, you know what I mean? So if he was going to have kids, it seems like he would have maybe had them maybe even prior to the ark. I don't know. I don't know if prior to that, but I I just think he was older and maybe too old to have more kids. His wife might have been too old to have more kids. And there was no other woman there except his daughter-in-laws or grandkid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because when we look at ages, we're usually only told of the first one, aren't we? I'm trying to think back.
Yeah, so he was it said he was 500. Then when he had his kids.
Shem, right?
Well, the way it was written was a little weird at the time because I think it was like by 500 he had these kids, whereas other people were saying they were this year's old.
Yeah. What is going on, XYZers, XYZ Nation? Back with the next episode of Generational Scriptures. And much like Genesis chapter 5, I think it was, it's probably going to be a lot of me reading because we're into another chapter which is really about moving things forward and seeing progression. As much as anything else. And we will get some nuggets in there and we will stop. And we will talk about some of the things that we see. But just be ready for a bunch of names. Give me grace because I'm going to mess some of them up. But hey, it is what it is. I think we're supposed to do something. We are supposed to introduce ourselves. So I am the latchkeyed one himself, former X-Man representing Gen X, all up in the area. What it be, what it do. This how we go. It's what we do. All right. And next to me, or first to me, what did I miss?
Your name?
Y'all don't need to know my name. My name's Chris. And I'm a Cancer. Doom, 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 doom.
I don't know what that means.
What?
Y'all don't remember that stuff? Like,
no.
I'm messing up the intro, but like when, like you should know it, Gen Xer. Some of the old songs, and they have like the slow melody, and the people talk.
Oh,
and
okay.
And my name's Leroy, and I'm a Virgo.
I remember that.
I do not remember.
That's all right.
Before my time.
Much before your time.
So I am the Gen Xer, Chris. And at the far end, we have...
I am Maya, the resident millennial.
Dun, 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 dun.
And we have next to me...
Wanda.
the other Gen Xer of the group. At least temporarily. She's sitting in for our Gen Zer.
Yes.
Jasmine.
Yes. Oh, man. So, we got to work on your intro, homie.
Well, I'm just here for the day.
No, you may be a regular, reoccurring, special guest.
I don't know about that.
No.
Okay.
So, we got to work on your intro.
Okay. Here we go.
All right. So, how do we usually start these episodes? We usually start with, all right, so boom segment. So, Ms. Moyo, all right, so boom.
All right, so I'm going back to chapter 9 to give a quick summary, or it might not be quick, but a summary. So in chapter 9, God blesses Noah and his sons and basically tells them to be fruitful and multiply. And he also says that animals will now have fear of the people. So no more, this like blissful, everybody getting along. But he also gives them the command that they can eat these animals. So that's why the animals probably should be a little scared.
Yeah.
But the one caveat to them eating it is that you cannot eat the animals with its blood, well, with its life, which is its blood.
Right.
Then God talks about the covenant that he's established with them and placing the bow in the sky and that being a sign that he will no longer flood the earth and basically destroy the entire earth. Noah's sons again are commanded to be fruitful and multiply. That's repeated a lot. And I think I might have missed the fact that the man can no longer kill man without a punishment. Right. So previously we saw where Cain killed Abel and his punishment was not death, but now the punishment for killing and taking the life of someone made in the image of God is death. Yeah. By man. Then we get Noah turning up in his tent.
Turning up in his tent. He had a disco ball or something.
Okay. He's in his tent. He had a good time and he sprawled out. And his son Ham walks in there, sees him naked, and instead of protecting him and covering him, he decides to go out and tell his brothers, who they do the right thing. They walk backwards, they cover their dad, pretend nothing happens, like we move on with our lives. But Noah wakes up and he realizes what Ham had done, and he curses Canaan, which is Ham's son, which is Noah's grandson. And we had some discussion about that in the last episode, so definitely check that episode out to hear what we had to say about that. But like everyone else, Noah and everyone else except for Enoch. Noah lives his final days and he dies, and that's how we end that chapter.
That's how we end it. Yeah, that was a I don't know, would you consider it like a come back to earth moment or something like that? I don't know. It just feels like it needs some. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It needs some exclamation point on it or something on it, because it's just, to me it seems really significant, that set of events after the flood and after everything that's been going on. So I don't know. You tell me, folks, if you think it does or doesn't. Maybe I'm just being too weird and looking for stuff to talk about. But hey, that's what I do. I neglected to mention the title. The title of this episode is Nations. That's it. Nations, because that's what we're talking about. And I'm ready to start. We ready?
Yes. Yep.
All right, let's boogie. We're just reading verse 1 of chapter 10 right now. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. So just is up in there. Note that it's the generations of the sons of Noah, not the generations of Noah. Right? So, and we talked previously about this generations thing where usually it's the generations of, but it's going to talk about the folks that follow the person that it talks about the generation of. So we're going to be looking at those people that follow, and I'll call them people for now, that follow Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right.
Do you guys think that Noah had any other children? Because this is the first time where we're not seeing, and they had other sons and daughters.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought of that. I don't know. I would tend to say no because of what is said here and from the our last chapter, where I believe it says something to the effect of Shem, Ham, and Japheth are the ones from whom all of the groups of the earth came from.
So does it feel like he's not following the command to be fruitful and multiply. Because, you know, some people are like, you got to have all these kids. I'm going to have as many kids as God allows me to have and all this other stuff. Like, with him only having the 3 sons, what would you say to like people who are like, well,
It
you
makes
should
sense
have?
to me because he was like 600 or so. And that means his wife was probably 600 or so. I don't know. I think that time might have been over. And his children were grown, those boys, you know what I mean? So if he was going to have kids, it seems like he would have maybe had them prior to, maybe even prior to the ark. I don't know. I don't know if prior to that, but I I just think he was older and maybe too old to have more kids. His wife might have been too old to have more kids. And there was no other woman there except his daughter-in-laws or
Yeah.
grandkid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because we are, when we look at ages, we're usually only told of the first one, aren't we? I'm trying to think
Yeah.
back.
So he was it said he was 500. Then when he had his
When he had Shem,
kids.
right?
Well, the way it was written was a little weird at the time. Because I think it was like by 500 he had these kids. Whereas other people were saying they were this year's old or.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And I don't know how. So, if you're 500 years old having a kid, I don't know what 600 means. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess.
So, I don't know if we can do the whole.
When is the cutoff?
Yeah, when we get to when we get some sense when we start to look at Abraham, because they actually say, I mean, Sarah says, how basically how am I going to have a kid when I'm 90 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that, you can sort of you can sort of pick up on the fact that maybe there is some level of cutoff, 90-ish before that. But here, with the ages and how long they lived, I don't know how long they were able to have kids. So even when we go back and look at 5, I mean, you got 135 for someone having the first kid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some of them may have been the first kids. We just talked about the
Yeah.
genealogies. We don't know which one is
Which kid
first,
it
whatever.
was.
But they're having children at 135 years old,
Yeah.
which for us now is like, whoa, wait, what?
Yeah.
So, and Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah not multiplying. I think that Noah is multiplying by virtue of his sons multiplying, but the Lord works things out, and I'm starting to think of things like Abraham, when Abraham told him he was going to have a son, and Sarah was already an older lady, probably past childbearing age. Um, but then Abraham goes into Egypt during the famine, and the Lord works things out where there's no doubt as to whose child this will be,
Mm-hmm.
because then Sarai is taken into the Pharaoh at the time's harem, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
and this whole thing transpires. Like, why didn't you tell me this was your wife?
Yeah.
Right? So the Lord can work things out such that there's no doubt as to who this child is or who his parents are. And I wonder if he's doing that here as too. There's no doubt that the entirety of the earth is coming from one of these 3.
Mm.
Everyone who lives, you have some trace of lineage back to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And that's what I wonder if he's working out.
Yeah.
So, which would mean that Noah, yeah, sorry, bro, you're not having any other kids because we're going to repopulate based on these 3.
Yeah.
And then, last thing I'll say is that it makes sense because remember when Eve was having children, she said for Cain, I believe she said it for Abel, and she said it for Seth. Well, I know Cain and Seth, maybe for Abel, but she says something to the effect of, I have been given a child, or I have had a child, um, by the power of the Lord, or something to that effect. Like the Lord
The
is the
Lord
one
has
who's
given me a
helping me
son. Yeah.
to have children. So just as he can help to have, I think he can also hold things back when needed. So I don't know. There's nothing written on that, but that's my take on those things.
Yeah.
And Moyo's not telling me I'm wrong, so maybe it's plausible. All right, so this really just 10:1 is just the introduction. Now, Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 through 5. The sons of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan: Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans in their nations. So right off the bat, we get hit with Japheth's lineage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we mentioned this last time. What you see in here, some are people, some are nations, basically.
Yeah.
Right? We saw Tarshish when we were looking at Jonah's story, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense that Tarshish is a coastland because Jonah was like, I'm running away. Did he go to Joppa?
He was fleeing. Was he fleeing to Tarshish?
Yeah, he was fleeing to Tarshish, and to get there, he had to go to Joppa to get on a boat, which is when the storm came up.
Mm-hmm.
So even from that little bit, and Tarshish is mentioned in some other places too, but even in that little bit, um, I think we can see that, yeah, there's some credence to these people being coastlands on the coastland, but also some credence to some of these groups and people that we see here, we're going to see in the future,
Yeah.
right? So they have some some significance there. Usually, when something ends in M, it's talking to like a group because it's M is like the plural, Elohim, right? We talked
Mm-hmm.
about that. And then all of the ites that we'll get into later, we'll see them as well. The last thing that I want to say is, do you all notice the distinguishing factors that is given about these folks?
So other than the fact that they're coastland peoples,
Mm-hmm.
they have their own language.
Mhm.
But is this now or later?
This whole passage, I think, is talking about what will happen.
Okay. So the
This
same
whole
type of
chapter.
the same type of foreshadowing that has
Yes.
been happening is happening again here.
Right.
Okay.
And then when we get into chapter 11, we see how,
Mm-hmm.
right? So at some point, this group of folks, they're going to separate in the coastlands. They're going to have their own lands, their own territories, boundaries. They're going to have their own language, meaning that just like we're doing here, we're speaking in American English. People can understand it. There are other languages that this can be translated into, I'm sure. Or what is it? You can do closed captioning for other languages, I'm sure. Um, by their clans, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I read up on this, when it talks about a clan, it's not the way that the commentary put it is that there is something from without that holds you together, as opposed to something from within that holds you together. So something from within that holds you together would be like family.
Okay.
Something from without that holds you together may be like, hey, we all speak a common language, or we all want to live in the same area,
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing. Um, so I thought that was interesting uh, as well. And then the last thing, in their nations. So there is a cultural context to this. And hey, these are folks that are living together. So you start to think of all of this group, and they're going off and they're starting to form nations like we see today. I mean, some people put these as folks who are in the northeast, northwest, to the north of Israel, of Canaan, rather, excuse me. So, which this is talking about how folks are dispersing and the filling up of the earth.
No, I think that there are some, like, people start getting into what that looks like geographically, and maybe there's a map out there, I didn't see it, but that kind of places where these places could have been.
Yeah, there are a lot. And I was debating on whether to try and get into that because I was looking at the commentary and it was like, yeah, these people are Assyria and these people are
Yeah,
Russian area and these people are, and it's just a lot of people
it
to
is.
try and ring out in this sitting. What I would suggest is you go try and find a map and maybe we'll try and find one and put one up if we can find it. But just read a commentary or two because they give you where a lot of these groups where they think they are. Some
Yeah.
of them they don't know,
Yeah.
right? They're like, oh yeah, they're here, but um, they may have even been mentioned somewhere later in scripture, but they still don't know, can't pinpoint exactly where it is. But
Yeah.
others that we'll see in a moment, they have a pretty good idea. All right, verses excuse me, yep, 6 through 20 of Genesis chapter 10. All right, hang on. The sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ra'amah, and Sabtaka. The sons of Ra'amah, Sheba, and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth Ir, Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. Egypt fathered Ludim, Anamim, Lahabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Calsuhim, whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorim. Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Hamathites. Yeah, close enough. Afterward, the clans of the Canaanites dispersed, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations.
Mm.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
So Ham definitely has some names and places that we are familiar with. Some names that we're familiar with today,
Yeah.
like Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Cush, I think even Put and Canaan itself, right? Um, but then you also have all of the ites that we run into. And we have to skip a little bit ahead to talk to that, right? Because these are groups that Israel, when they reach the promised land, is going to run into in Canaan. You start to think of, um, yeah, the Amorites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites, the Hivites. I mean, those are names that we're familiar with Israel having to deal with when they're in the land.
Yeah.
And makes me think back. I don't know if this does it for you all. Makes me think back to the curse and then what's going to transpire with Israel and seeing these names and thinking, well, this is the carrying out of the curse that Noah put onto Canaan.
Yeah.
So that's just interesting to me. We find also in here that Cush fathered Nimrod. That's one little aside that we find in here. So what stands out to you all about this Nimrod character?
He's a mighty hunter
A mighty hunter, finish that out.
before the Lord.
Before the Lord. Interesting.
Is that positive or negative?
Yeah. Um, I don't think it means that the Lord like endorsed it, if that makes sense. It's not like saying that he did this for the Lord or that the Lord endorses his. I think it's just saying that, yeah, the Lord sees all, and he's created all. We're all here because of him, and he's just a mighty hunter.
Mm.
What's interesting is that word mighty, Gabor, is the same word that's used about the Nephilim.
It also
were
says he's a
mighty
mighty man.
Right? Weren't the Nephilim called out as mighty men of old or something like that?
Yeah.
So not
So
saying
maybe.
that that's a huge tie, but it is interesting that the same word is used.
Mm.
Um, and so with Nimrod, uh,
We get Babel.
we get Babel, which will
Yeah.
be important.
Yeah.
Shinar, which will be important. Um, we also get some other places that we looked at in Jonah that are called out because of him. Says that he went off and he built Nineveh
Mm.
in Assyria, I think it said.
Yeah.
So again, what we're seeing here is this table of nations is what this is generally called. So all of these nations that we hear about and read about in scripture, I'm not going to say all of them are here 100%, but some of the major ones are, because Nineveh, Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh because of how bad they were.
Yeah.
Right. So not only do we get Nimrod called out, but we also get Canaan called out, which we know he's got the curse, and we talked about it a bit. But what else interested me is that not only was Canaan called out, but also the boundaries of his territory.
How far it went,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
And again, getting back to Israel and what this will mean for them, it's the same way I think that the Lord calls out what the bounds of Israel's land was going to be. And so we get that here, and then the Lord is going to reiterate that further on in scripture. So I think we can really say that this curse of Canaan really points back to where God, the land that God is going to give to Israel. And now the question is, how do we get to Israel from this three brothers?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I thought about so we had Japheth had the coastline, and in Noah's blessing of him, it kind of made it sound like he was going to be amongst, which now makes sense because he's there. His nations are kind of spread because instead of building into and out, out like spread the way we just heard about Ham's people, like they're taking up large territories, whereas Japheth is running across these coastlines, like he's in the mix of everything, kind of.
Yeah, he is. And also note, to your point, he's got the smallest one.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the smallest list of nations that come from it. While Ham with 6 to 20, 14, 15 verses is the largest, right? So Ham's people are greedy, I guess.
I mean, yeah, they have a lot of those. I don't call them evildoers, but like the it's the same pattern that we've been seeing where the father, we went from Cain to what is his name?
Lamech.
Lamech.
Yep.
So it's like there you see you're continuing, and if Jasmine was here, she'll say the exponential like
Right.
growth of everything getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing here. Like, okay, you started out with this sin, and now Canaan is going to be this like thorn in the side of these other
Right.
people. And
Right.
eventually they will be conquered, but you just see how far they get to go before it's like, okay, let's
Right.
cut this off.
Yeah. And that, because you bring up a good point by saying they will be conquered, and it won't be by flood. It won't be the same way that everybody's been dealt with before.
Yeah.
The Lord is going to take up a new path and a new method to deal with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lot in here, and the same thing, Egypt, Cush, and Put. We know have a pretty good idea. I think where we know those places to be today. I think Cush was more like Ethiopia type area, I believe. But like Africa, all of that, and starting to get down into Africa, even with Put, I think was more of the Libya area. But you just see that there's this group of nations that are still in effect today to some extent. Um, so that always interests me. And then don't want to miss it, the refrain from the last, right? Just as we saw, because as they're called out, um, these are the sons of Ham, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations.
Mm-hmm.
So you start to think of nations. I mean, the Lord has set it up such that this would happen, and there would be these organizational nations, if you want to call it that, just not a blob of people.
Yeah.
All right, Genesis chapter 10, verses 21 through 31. And they read as follows: to Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem: Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram: Uz, Hol, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Almadad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, Zerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dekla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Misha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. So we get to Shem. Shem is interesting because what was it when we looked in the last chapter where it called out Shem, Japheth. We're called out Ham, and it gave us a little aside about, yeah, he was Canaan's father.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's doing something similar here, where it calls out that Shem also, and it calls out that the father of all the children of Eber. So it's calling out Eber as something special
Yeah.
that's going to happen. We don't know what yet, but it's just being put out there as to something is going on with this child. Um, I don't think there's anything that is too crazy in here. Um,
I think for those who care about order, we get that Shem is the oldest.
yes,
And we knew that Ham was the youngest, so
Yes.
that puts Japheth in the middle.
yes, yep. So that's definitely cemented. Um, we see that. I want to make sure I get this right. To Eber were born two sons. One was Peleg, and the other was Joktan. right?
Hmm.
But we don't get anything about Peleg's sons in here.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to the map is trying to get you somewhere.
Right.
So I'm trying not to be like too focused on, well, why don't I have this detail or this detail? Because then it would be a huge book if we start
Yeah.
including everybody.
Right. Right. And I think that yeah, we'll have to see how this works out. Um, the other thing is the territory is mentioned for Joktan, right? And where Joktan they're going to be, and then the common refrain to all of these nations, um, by their clans, the languages, the lands, and their nations. So I think Peleg is going to come up for us in the future, and we'll have to see how that rolls out. But nothing here, other than the fact of the divided. The earth was divided. Makes me wonder what they mean by divided. Is it divided by people who walk with the Lord and those who don't?
Mm,
Don't know. Is it divided in another way?
yeah.
But that the name Peleg talks to division, I believe. And then Genesis 10, verse 32. These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. So that gets me back to your first question, Moyo, of, did Noah have sons? When I read this, it sounds like Noah's fruitfulness and multiplying is through his sons, and his sons are the ones responsible for all the nations, even as we see them today.
Yeah.
Um, when Moses was writing this, it would be in Moses's time, but obviously we don't think that stopped. There wasn't another big catastrophe that caused a reset. So that's the nations.
Yeah. That was a quick one.
Those are the descendants. I mean, I want, and we've said this all along. I guess we should just continue to say it, especially when we do these, because it can be short, but it's important
Yeah.
to understand, because the implications, particularly of this with the nations, is to show that from these three, there's this huge explosion of the mandate and the blessing that God has given and the command that He has given. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And what's happened here with all of these nations, and talking about the regions, talking about where they are, where they're going, understanding Egypt versus Put versus Cush and Nineveh and Assyria, and all of this, they're spreading out. They're
Mhm.
doing what the Lord had told them to do once we get here. Um, Now, I think we already intimated to this. The question is, how did it get to this point?
Yeah.
Because Shem, Ham, Japheth, and this is a good question that you should be asking, right? How did we get here? Because Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives presumably all spoke the same language.
Yep.
So how did we get to the point where, and their family, right?
Yeah.
They're probably not. I mean, one that talks about this all the time. Um, we ever get rich, everybody's gonna move on to the compound, right? We want to be around each other.
Yeah.
But something happens that says, nah, you won't. Matter of fact, somebody's going to start talking and you won't understand a word they're saying.
Yeah.
So, how do we get there? And I think we get to explore that in our last chapter for this season.
Yes.
Cool. All right. It's not a good segue, I don't think, from this. I think the segue is to say that God is working something out. God has worked out the point and to the point where floods happen and there's been a reset. We talked about in this episode. I think that the Lord is working to something else because he's the writer and the Lord's being carried along and inspired by the Holy Spirit to pen these words to move us from Noah to what he's going to work next. because God is still in the business of trying to redeem and bring back his people unto himself and to redeem his creation. Uh, and we're going to get to see how that works out a little bit as we work forward. And as you continue to read through Genesis, you'll see that. But what we know today is that the way that we are redeemed, the way that the Lord reconciles us back into himself, the way that the Lord reconciles, the Father reconciles everything back to himself in creation is none other than his Son. So our urge, as usual, is that you would believe in Jesus, that you would believe he is who he says he is, that he is God, that you would believe that he is the one who died on the cross, was buried, and was raised from the dead, that you would believe that he is the one who can address all of your sin, um, and that your sins no longer have to weight you down, no longer have to shame you, no longer have to put you in the eyesight of God for wrath, but that you can be in this time of grace a child, a son, a daughter of the Lord. So, prayers that you would believe that Jesus is who he says he is. If you believe that, then we'd like to hear from you. Drop us a DM, shoot us a message, because what happens after that is we need to get you to a point for discipling. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Anything else on this chapter?
No.
No.
All right, folks. With that said, we are Generational Scriptures. I'm Chris. At the end is Moyo and our special guest, Miss Wanda.
Mhm.
Feel weird
Just
calling
visiting.
feel weird calling you Miss Wanda.
Don't.
But we thank you all for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, we out of here. Deuces.
Bye.